Thank you very much. Thank you all for having me here. And I just want to bring greetings and thanks from my people, my father's people, the Wiradjuri, my mother's people, the Gomeroi, for allowing me to speak on your land today. And I have a deep connection to this country. I have a deep connection to this land. This land, the Aranda people, are also the people of my children through their mother. That when I walk on this land, I can walk too in the footsteps of my children's ancestors, and it is a very, very special place indeed for me. This morning, I was having breakfast with my brother, Ernie Dingo, and Ernie told me of a story that for me captured exactly why I'm here, and I'm sure why all of you are here. He told me of meeting an old uncle. This old man had lost two members of his own family to suicide. And he spoke to him and said, "Why'd you come here?" And he said, "I just want to know how to sleep at night. I just want to know how to sleep at night." He didn't just speak, I'm sure, for his own personal tragedy. But when he says those words, "I just want to know how to sleep at night," he speaks for all of us. Because for over 200 years, we've been asking that same question. We've been wondering, how do we sleep in a country where so many of our people don't know if they're going to wake up in the morning? It's the beauty and the simplicity of those words. The beauty and the simplicity of those words spoken by a man connected to his place that speaks to the purpose of us all being here today. The Polish Nobel Prize winning poet Czesław Miłosz said, "It is possible that there is no memory but for the memory of wounds." The memory of wounds. He was, of course, speaking about Europe that had been plagued by war, the Europe of the Holocaust, the Europe that had seen his own homeland, Poland, invaded. But he could just as easily have been speaking for us. The memory of wounds are our memories too. The memories of loss and sadness, the memories of grief, these are the memories that we are born into. This is our inheritance. These memories are not just carried within us. These memories seep deep into our land. This is a sad country in so many ways for us. I feel it when I'm sitting alone back on my country, Wiradjuri country. I feel it when I'm driving across the landscape, just lost in my own thoughts. I feel it when I sit by our water holes and our rivers, when I sit by places with names like Poison Waterholes Creek or Murdering Island. These are the places of death for us. These are the memory of wounds. And it's easier, we all know this, it is easier sometimes for us to live in the sadness than it is to embrace joy. We love and we find laughter in each other, but we check ourselves as well because we know too well that grief waits for us. That soon it is likely that we will bury yet another of our people gone too soon. Sadness is familiar to us in ways that happiness is not. It is the sadness sometimes that tells us who we are. It is the world from which we draw our identities. Happiness can sometimes feel like surrender. It can sometimes feel like letting go or giving up. It is the memory of wounds that connect us so often to our past and tell us who we are. I'm aware today that I share this place with so many of you who are grieving right now, and I honour that grief, and I honour you being here and being able to share your stories with us. People who have lost family to that crippling despair that leads to suicide. And I have to say that I cannot stand here today and not tell you of my own struggle with the darkness, my own dark night of the soul. The times that I too have looked into the abyss, when I have wondered what life is all about, when I have been overcome by waves of despair. I spent more than a decade covering the big stories of our world. It took me to places that were torn apart by conflict, that were riven with politics and religion. For me, it was 10 years of watching lives engulfed by tragedy and misery, to stand in the blood of a terrorist bombing, to see heads severed from bodies, to see people picking bits of human flesh out of the walls after an explosion so they could place it into a plastic bag and bury what remained. These were people whose lives were being turned by the big waves of history. It took a toll on me as I told the stories of these people, not just because I was connecting to their despair, but it was telling me something else. It was telling me about my own people. That when I looked into the eyes of an Afghan refugee, I saw the eyes of my father. When I met a Palestinian man who had fled his own country after the establishment of the State of Israel, only for war to follow him and find him again. And he went into his room and he brought out a little bottle full of dirt from his homeland. He said, "This is my home. I carry this home with me in the dream that one day I will go back." That was me. I was far from my home and I carried my home in my heart. In watching the world turn for over a decade, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the rise of China, the secret world of North Korea, in many ways I was seeing my history played out in real time. The 200 years of dispossession, suffering, and injustice that we have felt has been felt by others as well. In watching these things playing out before me, reporting the stories of so many others, I was reporting the stories of my own people. And I was aware at the time that for our people, that our stories weren't told. That here was a history unfolding before our eyes. We can talk of the conflicts of Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. We can talk of the rise of China. But how many people, even in our own country, can truly talk of what has happened to our people? How much of our history has been forgotten? How we were written out of history? I'm reminded of the words of the anthropologist Bill Stanner, writing in the 1960s when he spoke of Australia, and he spoke of the great Australian silence, what he called a cult of forgetting on a national scale. The French philosopher Paul Ricoeur says, "We must remember because remembering is a moral duty." A moral duty. We owe a debt to the victims by remembering and telling their stories. We save the victims from being buried twice. We save the victims from being buried twice. The memories of wounds. We know that it is still in so many ways an untold story that divides us still in Australia. The forgetting festers still like a sore. Milosz, the Polish poet reflecting on Europe, could also have been speaking for us when he said, Crimes against human rights, never confessed, never publicly denounced, are a poison which destroys the possibility of friendship between nations. Reconciliation, true reconciliation, is built on sharing and hearing our stories. In sharing, we can begin to see ourselves in each other. We can knit together the frayed fibres of our own humanity into something new, that we can look into each other's eyes and recognise something as truly human. I would like to think we're getting there in Australia, but we are still so far from that. I was reminded of that just this year. Just this year when we heard the news of a 10-year-old girl in a northwest corner of Western Australia who took her own life. There are so many stories like this. There are so many stories of people who have succumbed to this darkness, who were born into the darkness. This story resonated. It spoke to me as surely as if the girl was one of my own children. A 10-year-old girl. Think of what 10-year-olds should be doing. Giggling at the back of a classroom with their friends, skipping rope in a playground, pretending they're Beyonce and singing into a mirror with a hairbrush, the things of childhood. That's what a 10-year-old should be doing. In this case, a 10-year-old girl looked into her future and saw nothing but darkness. That should have been something that spoke to us all. It should have been something that spoke to the heart of this nation. She wasn't alone. As we know, there had been something like 19 suicides in that part of Australia in 3 months. Did we hear from our Prime Minister? Did we hear from our opposition leader? Why do we not see these lives as the lives too of our children? And I've pondered this and I've wondered about the way that we describe these things. An Indigenous girl, an Indigenous community, an Indigenous problem. No. This was truly an Australian girl living in an Australian town. We speak of these things as being Indigenous because it becomes someone else's problem. It's in the too hard basket. Imagine a 10-year-old girl dead in an Australian town. Imagine 19 people taking their lives in Australian towns in 3 months. Imagine an Australian town where 25% of the population is in prison. Imagine an Australian town with 50% unemployment. Imagine an Australian town with 5 times the levels of depression. Imagine an Australian town where the biggest cause of death for people under 35 is suicide. Imagine an Australian town without proper internet connection, without proper childcare services, or sealed roads, or proper access to education. We would surely hear from our leaders then. When we imagine us still outside of Australia. It is a problem that exists remote from the rest of the country. No, this is Australia. Bill Stanner, the anthropologist I spoke of, said also in the 1960s that we sit outside of Australia because we are trapped between the two worlds. For him, he said, ours, the Australian society, is a market society, and theirs, ours, Indigenous society, is not. Indeed, he said, there is a sense in which the dreaming and the market are mutually exclusive. That we have no place in this new Australia, that our very way of seeing the world is at odds with modernity. He was speaking of the disconnect between our societies, the first societies of this country, and the rest of Australia. Well, in the 50 years since, of course, so many of us have proved him wrong. The people who sit here today have proved him wrong. That we can have a foot in our traditions and a foot in the market. That we can speak our languages, that we can know our kin, and we can attend the best universities, that I can be a Wiradjuri Gomeroi man in New York or Jerusalem or Baghdad or Beijing as surely as I can be in Alice Springs or my hometown of Griffith. But still, for so many of us, this wall divides us. We need to smash down that wall. We need to come to that wall with the power of Joshua at the gates of Jericho. We all know our Bible stories. We all went to Sunday school. The might that Joshua brought to the gates of Jericho and saw those walls come tumbling down, that is the might of our people too. This is the might of Lingari and Perkins and Mabo. These are the people who have howled at the walls of division in Australia and brought those walls crumbling down. We don't bring economic power. We know that. We are the most disadvantaged people in Australia. We don't bring political power. We can't decide who sits in the lodge. But we bring the power of our place. We bring the power of our words. We bring the power of belonging. And Australia knows in its heart, people of goodwill in Australia know, for all their riches, that the path to belonging in this country comes through us. They know this. We have a great cause and we have a great responsibility. But as much is asked of Australia, much is asked of us too. We cannot look away from our failings where we see violence, where we see abuse and neglect, where we see our own closing down the walls of the lives of our children. We need to stand up. We cannot cling to our misery, the memory of wounds, if that is to pass to another generation. If it is to lead to our children looking into the future and seeing nothing but darkness. We cannot cling to endless grievance. This cannot be the foundation of our identities. There are those among us who wish to hold us in, to tell us what is and isn't black. That rather than tear down the walls, we know there are some as well among us who want to erect the walls. There are those people who would tell us that success is not black, that education is white, that a good job and a good home is not black. They would tell us, as we were told before, that we cannot live in the dreaming and the market. I don't accept that, and I know that people in this room don't accept that either. And if the price of liberty is forgetting, then I am prepared to let go too of the memory of my wounds. An identity that is forged around a collective memory of sorrow and loss. An identity that is forged around deficit and disadvantage is an identity of the weak, and that is not our people. We are not a weak people. We are a people who, against all odds, have stood up and have said that we will survive, that we will endure. And we can stand here today, all of us, and look into each other's eyes and know that our story is the story of each other. We are not a people trapped in the memory of wounds. The Crow Indian chief, Plenty-Coup, before his death, was asked by his biographer to speak of his life. He said, "When the buffalo died, my people's hearts fell to the ground and they could not lift them up again. After that, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Time stopped. The sense of being a crow stopped. A warrior people were forced onto missions and reserves, and they had nothing left to fight for. Among the Crow, everything was about war. It was about being a warrior. It was about defending your place on this earth. If a Crow mother, while cooking dinner, was asked what she was doing, she wouldn't say that she was cooking. She would say that she was preparing her men for battle. A Crow man sleeping was not sleeping, he was resting for battle. When he woke in the morning, he didn't rise to meet the day, he rose to meet the fight. Plenty Coups was reflecting on a life that had stopped. For our people too, 200 plus years ago, it could be said, after that nothing happened. But we've come together here today to lift our hearts off the floor. To know that we are not a people who will be defined by our loss. That as surely as we have had to meet the challenge of European society, that as sure as we have had to face the tragedy that has befallen so many of our people, we get up the next day and we prepare for battle the next day. Just coming here yesterday lifted my spirits. To see people coming with smiles on their faces, smiles in the face of what I know is an overwhelming grief. To have people come up to me and shake my hand, to be embraced by old people, to have my photo taken, to share in the stories of my people, lifted my heart. We can't expect that we'll walk away from here tomorrow with the answers. But we can expect that in coming together we walk away a little bit lighter than when we walked into this place. That our hearts are being lifted and that our memories in the future will not need to be the memory of wounds. When Ernie Dingo spoke to the old man, he said, "I just want to know how to sleep at night." That is the challenge for all of us. How do we sleep at night? And how do we lift ourselves from the memory of our wounds? Thank you again.